I have assembled the following materials to make this cape blazer. I have a separate video dedicated to the pattern tutorial for this project. I just thought it would be easier to sort of follow and recreate if the pattern tutorial was separate from the actual making. I'll be linking that down below, so please check it out. For the fabrics, I thought it was a great combination to have this purple hood tooth combined with this Ankara that has yellow and purple. The colors together, it just looks so good. I also got some interfacing which I'll be using to stiffen the front and back facing. I got some matching threads, and I also got two pearl buttons from John Lewis. They have the coolest buttons ever, and I just thought it was a nice addition to the cape. So also I have myself some pins as well as a scissors to be able to cut out my pieces. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin down my patterns. The first one I'm going to be cutting out is the actual cape. I have pinned it in such a way that there is a fold on the right hand side to ensure that I have one piece for the outer cape. I have folded the fabric horizontally, contrary to the vertical folding that you're supposed to do if you want to cut on a grain, but because of how wide this cape is, I folded it horizontally, pinned it down, and I'm just going to cut that out as well. I'm going to also cut out my other pieces, my fronts, my backs, my facings, my linings, and every other piece I need. Something else I'll also need to mention is don't forget to mark your notches, because this cape has a few pieces, and believe me, you'll be very grateful that you have notches to even start with. So I'm just going in here to mark all of my notches, the ones around my hem, my waist, and so on. So I'm going in here to cut my lining pieces. I'm cutting the front right now. I'm going to go ahead and cut the back as well as mark my notches, because we want our facings to look nice and smooth and clean even though they are inside the blazer. So once that is done, I'm going to lay out all of my pieces to ensure I have everything I need. And prior to filming this clip, I already went ahead and I fused my interfacing to my front facing as well as my back facing, because it just really helps to keep that part of the blazer nice, stiff, clean and flat. So those are my facings all fused. I also cut myself my front pieces, two of them. I cut my back, which is just one piece that I cut on the fold. I also cut my linings in this purple material because I thought it was an excellent way to just have that pop of color when you open the jacket and you see another color inside, contrary to what you have on the outside. So I also cut myself the cape lining, which I cut 1 centimeter shorter to ensure that it folds nicely inside and you don't see the bubbling that the lining would do if it was too long. So this is the order of assembly that you can just screenshot or write down so it's easier to follow this tutorial, and it's about 10 steps roughly. So the first thing we'll be doing is to join our cape to the lining, and we're going to join that all the way across the hem. I'm just going ahead here to pin it across, and because the lining is shorter than the actual cape itself, that's why it's doing this weird thing, but we'll address this later on. So I'm just going to take this to my machine and sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance from point A to point B using a normal straight stitch. Once I'm done stitching up the hem, I am going to go ahead and work on the side of the cape, and you can see because the lining was cut shorter than the actual cape itself, I'm just pinning together at the beginning of the side, and you would see automatically that outer piece would be able to be folded in such a way that when you turn this inside out, you're going to have a nice 1 cm folded hem around the bottom of the cape. So you're going to sew up the sides of the cape, the left and the right hand side, so it's just, you know, clean and properly finished even while you have the cape on. So I'm just sewing here on a 1 centimeter seam allowance from the top all the way to the bottom, repeating the same on the left and the right hand side. So once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and give this a good press, and this is what the cape will look like. So this is the reason why I cut the lining shorter than the actual cape. You can cut yours the same length, but you just have to be worried about the lining actually showing from the outside when you have it on. So once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step of the cape, which is to work on the actual blazer itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and transfer my darts onto the front panels on the wrong side using a pin. So I'm just going to punch out through the hole, mark with a chalk, repeat the same for the angles or the 4 points of a dart, and then once I have all 4 points sort of marked with a chalk on the wrong side of this front panel, I'm just going to go ahead and pin it like this. So once I take it to my machine, I know where my dart starts and where it ends. So I'm going to do this for my left and right hand side, as well as the back of the jacket, because the back of the jacket has darts as well. So we're going to sew all the way from the bottom to the top on my domestic machine using a normal straight stitch. The next thing I'll be doing is to join the shoulder seams of my facings. So I have my fronts as well as my back, and I'm just pinning them along the shoulder seam before taking it to my domestic machine to sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And as we go along, you understand why certain things were sort of put together before the others. So once I have done sewing this shoulder seam, I'm going to go ahead and sew my lining together. So prior to this recording, I've already done my darts. It's the same principle as I did with the fronts: transfer from the pattern, pin together, and sew on my machine. And I've done the same for my front and my back panels. So what I'm just doing here is I'm just aligning them together. I've held them down with some pins, the shoulder as well as the side seam. So at this point, I stitched the shoulder and I stitched the sides, but later on I realized I shouldn't have stitched the sides because I needed to have it open to be able to turn the jacket inside out. But you see what I mean as we go along. So once I'm done finishing the stitch, I'm just going to go ahead and take a look to see what it looks like. And what I want to do here is I want to actually join my facing to my lining. So you know, once you have this piece like this, it goes on the entire inside of the blazer. So I'm just joining shoulder to shoulder point, center front to center front, so on and so forth until I've pinned all of my points together. So you remember that 2 centimeters that were extended in the pattern tutorial. This is the point where you need to pleat it into the center back of your facing so you won't get confused when it's time to actually stitch. So I'm just going ahead to pin up any other points. Those notches came in really handy here, I tell you, because I was just like, wow, these curves look like they won't fit, but I knew what points belong together and I just matched them and then eased other areas into each other. So now that I've pinned my facing onto my lining, I'm going to take it to my domestic machine, ensuring that I left that 1 centimeter sort of extension that facing has on the front because the lining does not have it. So I'm just going to sew this all the way around from left all the way to right, going from the front around the neckline to the other side of the front. So I have one piece that sits on the inside of the blazer. Once that is all done and you turn it inside out, it should look somewhat like this. This actually looks like a really cool sort of sleeveless jacket idea. I'll actually keep this in mind. But before going ahead, I'm going to cut tiny snips around the seams on the inside, especially the curved seams. And what this will help to do is when you actually press this piece using your iron later on, those seams will relax easier because the tiny snips would help the seams to sort of rest nicer into the fabric. Moving on to actually attaching the cape to the blazer itself, I'm going to start by laying out the back panel against the lining like this, and I'm going to grab the front for the right side, so you can start with either side, it doesn't really matter, and I'm going to push this underneath, ensuring that the right side of the front is facing the right side of the material. And what you want to do here is you want to sandwich that cape shoulder on that right side between the front and the back shoulder points, and this is where the magic really happens, I tell you. So I'm just adding some pins here to ensure that it stays nice and flat, and I'm going to take the part that sits into the front arm curve and I'm just going to pin it to the front. So I went on and I checked with a tape measure to just ensure that that part was the same as on the left and the right hand side. So I'm just going to repeat the same step on the other side of the cape blazer, pinning my shoulders together, sandwiching the cape shoulder in between, and this is what it looks like. So this is the first sort of step in attaching the cape to the blazer itself, but I say pins would really be your best friend, because once you don't have this part sitting nicely, it shows when you finish the blazer. So I'm just checking to see if everything looks nice, and the stitching is a little bit complicated because you're going around corners here. So you start from around the arm, go all the way to the shoulder, around the center back, and back to the other side. Moving on to the next step, I'm going to be sandwiching all of this with the facing and lining piece that we did earlier on. And what this is going to do is going to help to hide that raw edge that you have along the arm curve. So I'm just pushing that lining and facing piece underneath this set that you can see right here, and I'm just adjusting it so that I can pin together the arm curve that goes from the front to the back on both the main blazer and the lining. So as you can see, I'm matching the back arm curve starting from the side all the way to the top to the shoulder point, continuing to the front like that. So what this would do is it will help to actually conceal any seams that you would have around the arm curve, so when you raise up your hand you don't see any raw edges underneath the cape. So I'm going to repeat the same thing for the other side. This is a lining piece. I'm going to take the main blazer sort of cape piece that we pinned together before this particular clip. I'm going to lay it out like this, and I'm just pushing the cape underneath so it's a bit clearer for you guys to see. And I'm just going to match back to back, front to front, and shoulder point to shoulder point, so it's sort of easier to stitch and it's easier for you to understand. For the sewing, you can either go around the front, along the shoulder, between that corner there, around the center back, down that shoulder and down the front, or you can do it the way I'm going to show you. So taking this to my domestic machine, I'm going to be sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, having everything nicely pinned like it looks here. So don't be scared, I promise you can do this. I was really unsure at this point how this was going to turn out because of how many pins I had in this particular garment, but I went ahead and I gave it a shot, and I'm glad I did. So I'm just sewing on a normal stitch using a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and what I did here is I went around the shoulder, around the center back to the other shoulder, and this is another way that you can sort of sew this entire piece together in one go. And when you get to the end of the other shoulder on the other side of your seam, you just simply reverse and stop there. And then what you do next after that is you just sew your arm curve from the front all the way to the back. So you've attached your cape, your blazer, your facing and your lining in those two sort of set of stitches. So now I'm just going to turn this inside out and take a look to see how it looks, if everything sits right. It wasn't really perfect, there were like puckerings here and there, but on the outside it was okay. So I know next time when I make this cape blazer or cape jumpsuit or cape dress, I know how to make the changes. So this is what it looks like right now. I just put it on the mannequin to check everything, to see if it sits right, to see anything that I could change, any adjustments, and I'm really pleased with how this sort of cape sat beautifully into the arm curve. Like you can't see any seams. I was so happy that this sort of trick worked. This is like the highlight of this tutorial for me. The one thing I added that wasn't mentioned earlier on is I added shoulder pads to add more definition to the shoulder of this blazer, because I just thought that the cape would spread more nicely if there was shoulder pads, just to make it, you know, more defined on the outside. And I did this simply by stitching in the shoulder pads with needle and thread on the inside of the blazer. So I wasn't really happy with the way this cape was spreading from the side, and I realized I should have made the cape sit in deeper into the front arm curve, and I corrected this later on in this tutorial. So next up, we're going to be joining the front seams of the facing to the blazer. So I've turned this whole thing inside out, and I'm just going to go ahead and pin the front seams together like so. And I'm going to be sewing from point A to B using a normal straight stitch on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So when you get to a corner like this, what you do is you raise your footer, you turn your needle to face the direction that you want it to face, and then you just go ahead and keep sewing until you get to another point where you need to make such twists and turns. After that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the jacket or blazer inside out, and just take your time if you work with shoulder pads, because you don't want to break your seams because you're trying to turn your outerwear inside out to sort of hide all of your seams inside. So this is what it looks like at this point. I was so pleased to just see it coming together slowly. And after this step, I'm going to go ahead and snip the corners for the front, so by the time I press that seam on the outside, it's just nice, sharp and clean. So once I've done that for the left and the right hand side, I'm going to go ahead and sew my side seams. And the way I'm going to do this is I don't want to actually see any seams on the inside of this jacket, so I'm going to take the outer side for the back and for the front, and I'm going to turn it in such a way that I'm going to match the side seam, sort of the one under the arm curve, and I'm going to pin them together and then join the side panels for the front and for the back as I'm doing here. So I'm going to join the main outer panel together, and I'm going to join the lining together all along the side seam. So what you have is you just have to sew one straight stitch that either starts from the lining or from the main piece, and you join your side seam from the beginning all the way to the bottom of the arm curve. You go into the other side and you finish it off at the bottom of the hem. So I'm just going in here to add more pins, so by the time I take this to my machine, I don't really have to think a lot, and this is what it should look like. So I'm going to sew from there all the way around there and finish it off at the other hem here. So this is what the blazer looks like. It took me about 2 days to do, but I'm glad I did not rush myself. I'm glad I really took my time and really ensured that it came out well. So as you can see, I've marked where my buttonholes and my buttons should sit. I have also corrected, that thing that the cape was doing earlier on. So I think the mistake I made in my pattern was this thing was about 3.5 centimeters deep. I suggest you make yours 4 or 5 inches deep, so it just goes a little bit into the front arm curve, and that I've just pinned it here so you have an idea of what it would look like if you make yours a bit deeper compared to how I had it earlier on, when it was making that weird angle that I wasn't really happy with. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and work on the hem of this blazer. I'm just simply going to fold it by 1 inch. You can decide to do, the sort of like blind method when you turn it inside out, you hand stitch and all. I just wanted to have it really simple and straightforward, and I'm just going to fold it like this and then stitch from one point all the way to the end. But ensure you fold in that 2 centimeter extension on the center back as well. So next up, I'm going to be attaching my buttonholes. I've already marked them. I'm just ensuring they are wide enough because of the size of my buttons. So I'm just using a chalk and a tape to just make the lines a bit clearer before taking this to my machine to actually fix my buttonholes and sew my buttons. My buttons were about 2 centimeters wide, and I ensured I made the buttonhole slightly wider so you can easily put on and take off the buttons. And I'm just going in here to just fix the buttonhole using my domestic machine. This thing is like magic, literally. I don't have to pay anybody to fix buttonholes for me. I just do it here on my machine. So once that is done, I'm going to take a look, cut it open, and it looks relatively good for something that was made with a domestic machine. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew on my 2 pearl buttons on the front of the blazer. And once that is done, the jacket is finished. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this tutorial. It was a real test of faith, tolerance, and everything, because there were several steps that I wasn't sure of, but I went ahead and tried out, and I would unpick and resew. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching anyways. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. I'd love to know all of your thoughts. comments and suggestions down below. And until my next video, have a beautiful morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are. Bye.